about employee ownership, and for many it seems an odd kind of juxtapositioning of words. For many people in our society, they tend to associate ownership of the means of production and employment in two different camps, and it's hard to see the two things being able to sit in the same word, and yet there are increasing movements within the United States toward employee ownership, and in fact the movement toward employee ownership is really only part of a much larger movement, or a much larger philosophical view that is known as binary economics, which talks about not only employee ownership but citizens' ownership or economic democracy. And it's that this program wants to address.
Many workers only earn one thing from their job, their paycheck.
But 8 million other workers now earn something more, a lot more.
In addition to their paycheck, these workers also earn part ownership in their company. The difference?
These people work for an E.S.O.P company.
Every year I work here, my ownership in this company increases.
I feel very fortunate to be working for an E.S.O.P company.
When you do a job, you do it even harder and even better because you know that you're part of the company.
These people are part of an exciting new idea taking hold in American business. The idea that employees should own stock in the companies where they work. An employee stock ownership plan, or E.S.O.P, encourages stock ownership by employees. Special laws encourage companies to make a stock contribution into a trust account held for employees until they leave.
Working for an E.S.O.P company isn't like working for just another company with benefits, because an E.S.O.P isn't just another benefit.
It's ownership.
It's a good idea.
It wasn't too many generations ago that most workers were owners.
A carpenter owned his hammer.
A blacksmith owned his forge.
A farmer owned his plow.
But the Industrial Revolution, with its emphasis on bigger machines and mass production, changed that. Today, few of us could ever afford to buy these machines.
Or these computers. From these new workhorses of industry comes the wealth we all wish we had.
Yet, the simple fact is, today, most workers don't have a chance to own what they've helped build.
Several studies show that just 1% of the population owns 50% of the individually held stock in the United States. To more broadly share the vast wealth our economy produces, Louis Kelso, the founder of the E.S.O.P concept, reasoned that more people should own these machines and the buildings they work in.
We think we ought to live better. We know that technology makes it easier and easier to produce goods and services, and we think that everyone should be able to live better. Trouble is, we've made a mistake as to how to do that. We thought you could do that through labor. Well, you can't. I mean, that simply distorts the system. Ideally, an informed person would not work for any company that didn't have an E.S.O.P. Employees are natural shareholders for their employer's stock. What it does, of course, is raise the earning power of employees by making them capital workers as well as labor workers. A wise employee would choose an E.S.O.P company over a non-E.S.O.P company, other things being equal every time.
From these exciting ideas of Louis Kelso
came bold new legislation from Senator Russell Long, the powerful senator from Louisiana. Starting in 1974, spanning a decade and involving 17 pieces of legislation, the E.S.O.P concept has become a lasting reality.
All my life, I have believed that those who create wealth, working by the sweat of their brow, should share some of that wealth that they create. That's what employee stock ownership plans do. Generally, we provide tax advantages to those companies and those employers who will put in plans that make it possible for the employees to own stock in those companies. That provides a tax advantage for the employer, and it provides a meaningful amount of stock to the employee. Some ask, why do we use a tax advantage to encourage companies to put these employee stock ownership E.S.O.P plans into effect? Well, without the tax advantage, it would not be sufficiently attractive for most companies to put the plans in. Now, I've never been against using a piece of sugar to get a horse inside the barn. And that's what we're doing with E.S.O.P plans.
But are the economic dreams of Louis Kelso and the legislative genius of Senator Russell Long actually working? Absolutely.
In 1975, there were 1,600 ESOPs covering 240,000 employees.
By 1986, over 8,000 companies and 8 million employees enjoyed the benefits an ESOP company provides. And by the year 2000, some observers predict that 1 of every 4 U.S. workers will be with an ESOP company.
Since 1974, Congress has passed numerous laws making sure ESOPs are properly regulated, with every employee getting their fair share.
Many individual states also have laws encouraging ESOPs to help achieve local ownership of business and jobs.
Today, employees of Comsonics own 100% of their company, as envisioned by its founder and original owner, Warren Brown.
Originally, when I formed Comsonics, I had in mind a 100% employee-owned company. Through the ESOP, this has become possible. And I can tell you, it's been a great success.
Since the inception of the ESOP in 1975, Comsonics has achieved an annual growth rate of between 17 and 20% per year, and continues to be recognized as a leader in the cable television industry. At Katz Communications, employees with 10 years of service often have 6 figures in their ESOP account.
Of course, not every company with an ESOP is that successful. There's no guarantee. An employee owner's financial return from an ESOP will always depend on the performance and profits of the company. In fact, most ESOPs are doing very well.
A study of 150 ESOPs showed an ESOP employee earning $18,000 will accumulate an average of $31,000 in stock after 10 years. Clearly, employees benefit from an ESOP.
But companies benefit too, because ESOP contributions and all corporate financing through an ESOP are fully tax deductible.
Without our ESOP, we might never have been able to expand or buy out a single owner who's retiring.
The ESOP was quite helpful in attracting qualified staff, especially at the professional level, people that are looking for long-term professional careers.
When the company does better, so do the people who own it.
And with an ESOP, that means you. One reason ESOP companies do better is that employees and managers share common objectives.
When people are working for a common objective, they often achieve uncommon success.
A National Center for Employee Ownership study also found that ESOP companies generated 45% more jobs and 40% more sales than their non-ESOP competitors.
And ESOP companies are more likely to stay in business and have a higher annual productivity growth rate.
Increasingly, the general public is coming to recognize the economic wonder of employee ownership. 69% think employees at ESOP companies work harder.
81% believe that workers at ESOPs pay more attention to quality, and workers across America valued ownership so highly that they would be willing to trade their next wage increase for a share of ownership in the company where they work. And that's the real beauty of an ESOP. Employees can have ownership without giving up a wage increase.
Working for an ESOP is in many ways like working for yourself. The contribution you make can directly benefit your company's performance and how much you earn, now and in the future.
Employee ownership is why millions of workers end the day with the satisfaction of knowing that they weren't just working for a paycheck.
They're working for the long-term profit and rewards that only an ESOP can bring.
Louis Kelso, the father of the ESOP, addressed the New York City Council on the implications of employee ownership to the city of New York. His testimony upcoming.
We finance them in ways that differ from the techniques used by the conventional investment banking world. In general, those techniques are designed to make the rich richer. Our techniques are designed to make the poor richer. By poor, I mean people who don't own income-yielding capital. I've been working on this subject for 50 years. That's quite a while. I first started thinking about it in 1931, the bottom of the Great Depression. I was provoked to get interested in it because it seemed to me, I was looking at, as a youngster, looking at what the elders were doing with the economy, and I couldn't understand how we could have virtually unlimited resources, unlimited know-how, unlimited manpower, millions of them, 15 million then, idle, and yet enormous needs and wants. And I said, how can they do it? This is absolutely magic. Those are the elements of prosperity. But they have to be put together right. Many years of study and experimentation convinced me where the error was. And I'd like to just illustrate that by these three little diagrams that are on your desk. And they've been numbered 1, 2, and 3. Here is what I think has happened. Firstly, let's point to something obvious, but it's something that we shouldn't overlook. There are two wells, not just one, as we often are told. There are two ways by which individuals can participate in production and earn income. One of them is to have employed your privately owned labor power. Either employ it yourself or have someone else. The other is to employ your privately owned capital. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about land, structures, machines, capital intangibles like patents. And those are normally owned in the form of corporate stock. Well over 85% of the operating assets in the American economy are held in corporations. So the ownership of those operating assets is through corporate stock. Briefly, here is what has happened that we have overlooked. In colonial days, there was only one really important form of capital, that's land. We were in an agrarian economy. Land was cheap. It was plentiful. It was thought to be unlimited. Labor was very dear and was very valuable, particularly compared to labor income in Europe, from which most of our ancestors came from. In colonial days, we were an economic democracy. You see what I'm be very specific what I'm talking about now. There are two fundamental forms of social power. Power that can be wielded socially, without police, without troops, without coercion, without fraud. One is political power, the power to make, interpret, administer, and enforce the laws. And political democracy is participation in that process. But the other one is economic power, the power to produce goods and services. Now, I think nature had in mind a certain plan for man. In pre-industrial times, where virtually all the productive input came from labor, nature had it allocated. One man, one labor power. One woman, one labor power. Economic democracy. I think nature was telling us something for the future, because nature must have known we had already invented tools well before that. To use Arnold Toynbee's phrase, the Industrial Revolution is a change in the way in which goods and services are produced. What was that change? It was a change from labor-intensive to capital-intensive. If I may define one who works through his labor, that's the power of his mind and body, acquired talents and so forth, as a labor worker, let me define a capital worker as a man who works through his privately owned capital. Now, what has happened over that 208-year period, because the Industrial Revolution in America was born at the same time as the Political Revolution. That was 1777. Over that 208 years, the burden of production has changed has shifted from labor to capital. This doesn't mean that labor is ever going out of style. It just means that capital produces constantly more and more and more. And that if every man is going to earn his income, if we're going to restore the economic democracy of pre-industrial days, when every man earns what he wants to spend and is free of welfare and redistribution and hunger and poverty, then we've got to begin building capital ownership and making capital workers out of those labor workers. Now, I'll tell you what the problem is. While diagram number 1 shows you how the burden of production has shifted off labor workers onto capital workers, diagram number 2 shows you something else that's rather sinister. From the very beginning, the capital ownership is in the top 5% of wealth holders. It bumped up. Under the Homestead Acts, we were still an agrarian economy. That was a deliberate policy of government to get capital ownership into the people who couldn't buy it, couldn't afford it, step up and buy it and pay for it. I think that capital ownership got up to somewhere around 20% or perhaps as high as 25% in the 40 years following 1862 when the first Homestead Act came into existence. But around 1910 to 1920, the frontier closed. Not only that, the importance of fabricated capital, structures, machines, intangibles, began to outstrip the significance of land. Not that land will ever be insignificant any more than labor will, but fabricated capital became terribly important. All of the studies from the Temporary National Economic Committee back in 1837 down to date, there have been about 8 or 9 of them, show that again, all the capital ownership is in the top 5% of wealth holders. I'm always impressed. I live in San Francisco. I'm always impressed when I come into New York City by air. I see that gigantic, gorgeous, fabulous city as just one intricate, complicated, wealth-producing machine. Dwelling machines, office service-providing machines, the great office buildings, the subways, the factories, the whole kit and caboodle. That capital produces at least 90% of the goods and services, but it's owned by only 5% of the people.
Among those who were at the city council meeting, or at the council, were at that session relating to New York City, was Carolyn Maloney, who is now Congresswoman Maloney, and we had done an interview with her, and we have excerpts of her discussing some of the implications of the employee ownership movement, as well as it relates to New York City.
As you said earlier, it's a capital idea, and it's one that the great city of New York, that has been at the forefront of major innovations, should hopefully take the lead. I hope they'll pass this legislation and move forward as an example and a leader for this country.
Well, it's appropriate that Mr. Rangel in the House is helping to lead the fight at the national federal level. It's appropriate that in New York City that it began to be taken over by the people who are, again, leading the nation in a financial set, that be the city that sets the pattern for the rest of the nation, perhaps. And as the nation as New York goes, so goes the nation, perhaps. And you're setting a pattern for it. And I just congratulate you very much on your initiative and how helping to bring this into the attention of the city council and the importance of it. And I just wish you, obviously, all the very, very best.
There have been a number of gatherings of individuals in various meetings of the, among other things, the E.S.O.P Association of America, the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, E.S.O.P Association of America, And we had an opportunity to talk with Granados, the director.
I suppose it must be a pleasure for you to be here in New York City to encourage this development on the part of the City Council to encourage E.S.O.P. Of course, it would be. You've been taking a national purview in terms of this development. And it might be you'd be able to share with us, there's been major legislative breakthroughs at the federal level. Maybe you could share a little of that, and then we could bring that around, talking about the relevancy here to the folks right in the
Yes, there have been, thanks to Congressman Charles Rangel of New York. He took the lead in the House, along with Senator Russell Long in the Senate, to enact the most sweeping incentives for employee stock ownership plans ever. It's going to cut interest rates on loans to ESOPs. It's going to make it much more attractive for owners of closely held businesses to sell their company to an ESOP when it's time to retire. It's going to become one of the most powerful estate planning tools for owners of closely held businesses. And it's going to start making it much easier for employee owners to get a second income from capital ownership. Because now dividends paid to an ESOP are going to be deductible.
Your work cut out for you.
We have our work.
Educate people to the reality.
That certainly is our work, and the city of New York and other state economic development programs can do that, and that's what these the bills are all about that we had the hearing on today.
Don't you think it would be good that the New York Council has taken this position so that it would be easier for you and they to work together to the mutual benefit of the business and the general citizenry? That's a good sign.
One of the points that I made in my testimony today was the biggest and most well-publicized ESOP was the one at Weirton Steel.
Yes.
That deal wouldn't have happened had it not been for support provided by the state of West Virginia Economic Development Program. They put in $100,000 to help pay for the feasibility study. And were it not for that early support, they might be closed down by now.
Yeah, that was the early support of certain people who had vision, who could see ahead a little bit, perhaps, of some of the...
They could see that West Virginia was about to lose its biggest single taxpayer.
Right, all right.
And it's probably the best $100,000 they ever spent.
The real father of it in terms of the legislative side of the movement toward expanding ownership was Russell Long, who was Senate Finance Chairman and extremely powerful man in terms of the federal government. It was he who reached down into his populist roots and became a Kelsonian, became one who advocated very much the ideas that Louis Kelso was advocating, became in a very real sense his champion in the Congress. And we here now have some excerpts from an interview that was done with Russell Long, again talking about the philosophy and the importance of the democratization of the ownership of capital assets in our society. So upcoming is Russell Long, Senate Finance Committee Chairman.
It's been passed now through the Senate, and I wonder if maybe you could talk to the cable audience a little bit about the significance of that bill as you see it, because it adds new impetus to this E.S.O.P movement that's beginning to happen in the country.
Well, this bill makes it more attractive for people to get involved in employee stock ownership. One of the incentives to do so would be that if a person wants to leave in his will stock to the employee, to the company, that would be treated the same as a charitable contribution. It would not be subject to an estate tax.
Okay, yeah, right.
And that would make it very attractive. In addition to that, if he just wanted to leave the value of the stock to his heirs or relatives, but he did not see fit to give the stock to employees, he could make it available to them, sell it to the employees, and let them pay it out on time, under circumstances where he would only pay half as much estate tax on the estate as otherwise. Now, by doing it that way, it would make it worthwhile to offer the company to the employees, and if they could pay over a period of time, let's say, as much as others would pay for the company, there'd be a big tax advantage, so that people would find it more attractive to sell the company to the employees if they weren't going to continue to run it through their heirs.
Yes, it might make it at least as attractive as selling it to some outside group or something as that, and put them on an equal par at any event. Right?
No, it should be more attractive.
All right, fine.
Now, furthermore, one of the troubles about expanding employee ownership is that the banks are not familiar with employee stock ownership loans. We call those E.S.O.P loans, employee stock ownership. And this bill would say that where a bank makes a loan so that the employees can buy stock in the company, that they would only pay taxes on 1/2 of their interest income. that would make it more attractive to the banks to make loans of this sort. It indicates that the government would like to see them make loans of that sort to the employees to acquire stock in the company, but also makes it more attractive for the banks to make it. They'd like to hold that kind of paper, you'd think, and it would get them involved in it.
Sure.
And so that will make it more attractive for the banks to get involved.
In general, the idea of the employees and the citizenry in general becoming owners of technological production is a good general thrust for the American economy.
That's correct. And we also have another provision that says that where the company declares a dividend, we would treat it just as though it were wages if it's for the benefit of employees, so that you would pay no tax at the corporate level. It would be deductible at the corporate level, just as a corporation does not pay taxes on the money it uses to pay wages to the employees. So that if the workers own stock and it pays a dividend to the employees, it would not pay a tax on that income which is paid as dividends to the employees. It would be deductible in effect.
Well, that's good.
And by doing it that way, they could pay a larger dividend to the employee than the employee would receive otherwise, perhaps almost twice as much for companies that are in a 46% bracket. Now, that would also apply to help pay off a loan if the employees want to borrow money, buy stock in the company, and use the income from the stock to pay off the loan. They would just get a lot more dividends to pay the loan off because it would not be taxable. There's another provision that would say that the very favorable arrangement that where a family has a long time and very favorable circumstances to pay the inheritance tax, where the decedent or the person who dies leaves the family stock in his small business, that the same favorable terms would apply to the employees where the person who dies leaves the stock to the employees of the company. They would also have a 14-year period and the favorable terms that would exist if the children, let's say, of that same person inherited that same small business company.
Yeah, all of these are going to make a milieu, a national milieu, which is going to be encouraging the general proposition of employee ownership as we begin to move ahead.
That would.
And I wonder, were you encouraged by the fact that you had such an incredible, from a certain perspective, were there 46 co-sponsors in the Senate of this bill, and it had such bipartisan support?
I regret only one thing. I did not insist on a separate roll call vote on that particular section. I think it might have carried unanimously in the Senate. There was no objection to it. And if we'd had a roll call, it would have been overwhelming. You know, more than 95% of senators would have voted for it, I'm sure. Subsequently, we might have a chance to have a vote on it before it's all over, but I'm sure that those provisions would have been very popular with all senators, and with that many co-sponsors, I have no doubt that we'd have had at least 90% of all senators vote for it. Had we had a roll call as it was, it simply passed without objection.
That must be very encouraging for yourself as a true pioneer in terms of understanding the significance of structuring the system, economic system, to encourage ownership and so forth, to find that so many people now are becoming in line with that idea, and that there seems to have come a long way since 1971, 72, 73, that period, and a great deal more acceptance of this general proposition by decision makers, business leadership, and perhaps not significantly yet, but by the general citizen. You must be encouraged by the fact that the direction that we're going historically.
I feel very good about that. It's parallel to something else I've done during my service in the Senate. Many years ago, I started out fighting for a proposal to make fathers support their own children, to make payments to their children.
Interesting.
And it was controversial when I started out. People said it wouldn't do any good. Well, it's done a lot of good. But the amusing thing about it is that the last time we expanded that program, which was just this year, both in the House and the Senate, we had a roll call vote, and the bill to move forward in that same area passed by a unanimous vote. And I have no doubt that this, in due course, will be something that will be unanimous. It's almost unanimous now that this is the way the majority of Democrats and the majority of Republicans seemed inclined to go. Now, I don't want to move too rapidly, but I do want to keep moving in this direction because it's popular, it's good for the country. And I just happen to think, and I believe most people who view this program think that the rank and file of people, particularly people who work for a living, ought to own a piece of the action. They ought to own some stock in the company for which they work. It gives them a greater interest in the work that they're doing. It creates better relationship, a better attitude on the part of workers, and a better understanding on the part of workers and management when the workers are in effect partners because they own stock in the company. I think this tends to get higher productivity from workers, and I think it's a way of the future. I just think that the day when all the wealth and the corporate stock and the ownership of industry would all be in the hand of a relatively small number of people should be brought to an end. Not saying that those who are rich shouldn't continue to be rich or that the management shouldn't continue to own large amounts of stock, but simply that if it's a good thing, it ought to be shared by a lot of people, especially those who do the work to make it all possible.
Yes, sir. Particularly as we begin to move where technology is becoming more and more significant in terms of production. The production of the economy is more and more technologically oriented, isn't it, in a ratio with labor. So if we can begin to have people who've only had a labor-wage relationship to the economy, have an ownership stake, it could really change the whole milieu and the psychology of the nation. It might help to alleviate a great deal of alienation to the degree that it does exist among certain people about the American system.
Well, sure. Yeah. You know, there's nothing new about the general idea. It's many, many years have seen situations where someone would employ a young person in the business. The young person does a good job, and in due course, the boss says, well, I'm going to make you manager of this store, and then in due course, we'll give you stock in the company or make you a partner. Now, in some professions, you take the legal profession, for example, those lawyers are smart.
Yes.
They know what their value is and what they're worth, and if you've got a good lawyer working for you, you're going to have to make him a partner in the firm. Right. Otherwise, he's going to leave you. And we're just trying to do, in some respects, the same thing for workers that was the case for lawyers for many, many years.
Or for other professional groups and so forth.
Doctors tend to be the same way, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
And if he's good enough to keep around there over a period of time, you better make him a partner. Otherwise, he's going to leave.
Yeah. I wonder, just one quick question. We're in a presidential election year now. I wonder, do you think that the issue, the general issue, the ramifications, the philosophy, the thought process of notion of expanding ownership, some of the capital formation capabilities that entails, the notions of equity within the economy and so forth, that this general movement of expanding ownership does spell in terms of the historical development of our economy, if that issue might not be a more pointed one at a presidential level in a presidential debate as we come into a presidential election. And is it sufficiently discussed as an issue on a major scale, do you feel, I wonder?
Well, I don't know whether it's going to be a presidential issue, but I think either party would be well advised to put in a platform and actually make it an issue. And I think that either presidential candidate would be well advised to make the point to people that under his leadership, the average worker is going to come to be a shareholder, and that his holdings will increase as time goes by, and that we'll pass more of the kind of legislation that we have here and provide the wherewithal. You know, so many people get rich by using government credit. You don't realize it, but many times you borrow money from the bank takes that note down and discounts it with the Federal Reserve, so they'll have more money to lend out. And so they make money in the process. They make a profit in doing all that. But in doing so, they are in the last analysis lending you money that they're getting out of the Federal Reserve Bank, which is, after all, a government bank owned by all the people.
That's right.
So that in effect, many times people are, in the last analysis, borrowing large amounts of money from their own government. They're borrowing the taxpayers' money to build their own private plants and industry and expand them. And I'm simply here to argue that if it's good enough to do for the benefit of those who are already wealthy, why shouldn't we do more for the benefit of the rank and file, who incidentally pay most of the money that goes to support this government anyhow. You know, as much as we admire the wealthy people who pay a lot of taxes, most of the tax money comes from people who are not wealthy.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Most of the people, and they haven't had historically, as you pointed out, a really significant ownership in the technology historically, nearly to the degree that it's been a heavy concentration.
Well, it's unfortunately true that 50% of the people in this country own less than 5% of the net worth. And how the corporate stock, or really you might say the investment assets that own, the income-producing properties that exist, be it corporate stock or be it just properties for rent and things of that sort, 80% of the people don't own any of that.
Yeah, that's a shame.
And we ought to see to it that they do.
Yeah,
at least most of them own something.
Yeah, and there would be a transformation in the thinking as they begin to shift and begin to get a sense of being an owner, having a piece of the rock, as it were, a piece of the action, as it were, could be part of an understanding that could help to alleviate alienation and give us a direction toward the future as a nation.
Well, I believe in capitalism.
Yes, sir.
But I believe capitalism should be democratic.
All right.
The way to make it democratic is to see to it that the average worker owns some of it.
Let it then become actual capitalism.
Someone else who had been a supporter of the idea, who had supported it in certain of the early phases when he was Secretary of the Treasury, was William Simon. He is here going to be represented in terms of an interview that was done with him and him lending his general support to the notion of ESOPs when he, as chairman of Westray Corporation, and that he generally has always approved of the idea of the ESOP itself. So here's William Simon, then the chairman of Westray Corporation, and former, of course, Secretary of the Treasury, and someone who had done considerable to improve the situation in terms of ESOP participation by the workers of this country.
Welcome very, very much to this segment of Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome to the program once again Mr. William Simon. And Mr. Simon is the chairman, of course, of the Lay Commission report, the Catholic Lay Commission report. And Mr. Simon, Bill Simon, welcome once again to Conversations.
Well, thank you. It's been a long time, and it's nice to be with you again.
Well, indeed, it's nice to be with you. And this report that's been issued has been one that's been very well put together. You've had a great hand in helping to shape and to form that report. And it is important that we have a kind of comprehensive view of our economy now, because we're at it's an overworked term, but we really are at a time of crucial new direction for our economy. It's important that we have an overview.
I agree with you. I think the country's in transition.
Well, we will be working in a way where the governmental process, or the overall governmental process, and the marketplace force and so forth will be in league with one another, and they're good intention in terms of.
Sure, government is always good intention. That old saying, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help you." Having spent 4.5 years in government, that's a lot of nonsense.
Well, you did a lot of help for the people you were there. You were there to help when you were in the government, right?
I mean, you were working on that. I tried to help change things.
Yeah, right.
That's what I tried to do, and we got some things done during that period that helped to begin to redirect. Back to the private sector. You know, the Catholic Church has always preached, what I learned anyway, and what constant encyclicals have reinforced, the concept of subsidiarity, Thomas Aquinas, where the decision-making should be at the lowest possible level of a community, where the decision-making goes to the people who are most affected by the decisions. They're the ones who are best able to decide their future, not the all-powerful government who indeed has noble notions, and
of course,
and the bishops are very noble in their intentions and very pious in their intentions. They just happen to be wrong.
Well, they're noble in their intentions. There are people who've seen government as a way of trying to help the needy, because it's difficult for some of those people to find their way in some traditional views of things in terms of the private sector activities available to them. Open up private sector activities increasingly to them, or to try and get past some of the problems that exist between what is seen problems between labor and capital and so forth. We're finding new dimensions of being able to find that. There's increased ownership of employee stock ownership. That's a good general tendency. Both of the reports do give a positive view toward the notion of expanding ownership of some of the plant and equipment in our economy.
Something over 10 years ago, as you well remember, I worked with Russell Long in putting an E.S.O.P through in the Congress, which I consider critical to the salvation of the free enterprise system. And my company here, Westray, I don't wish to give a commercial. We're a private investment company. My partner Ray Chambers and we both feel very deeply about this system that has provided opportunity for so many millions of people through the generations. And we own 19 companies, and we're in the process of commencing to E.S.O.P, employee stock ownership, every one of our companies. I want our employees to own the companies. I want them to ultimately own all of the companies, and you'll find that productivity improves, efficiency improves, and the pride of the employee when he becomes an owner.
Absolutely.
Everybody from the person who sweeps up at night to the highest executive is going to have a piece of the action.
People
that's what this system's all about,
yeah,
and that's what I want to be able to do.
Yeah, we've been able to encourage that direction of increasing the ownership of the means of production.
And isn't it great? You know that you know. Russell is such a remarkable person.
Yeah, he's carried that very heavily.
Yes, he really has. He carried it single-handedly because I remember my Treasury Department at the time absolutely was opposed to it. Of course, bureaucrats very often are opposed to so many things that they didn't think of themselves. And that's all right, because I spent my life overruling bureaucrats, usually not getting away with it because they found some way to subvert them. But nonetheless, we've created something over 6,000 E.S.O.Ps in this country, and we're going to do a lot more because the American people want it, and they like it, and they like to participate. It gives them a pride to go to work in the morning, you know?
Not only pride to go to work, but it also opens up an alternative, because if you begin to think of people like in terms of building a portfolio or building a retirement in a private sector, private property-oriented economy, they begin to have some alternative way of distributing income beyond only the labor relationship that so many of the people have had, not having ownership. In general, the idea of expanding ownership in the economy is a good direction.
And then, of course, you expand the wealth.
There are many other people outside of the government or business that are also beginning to question this problem. Jeremy Rifkin has an interesting book, The End of Work, and Dr. Stanley Aronowitz, shown here, a professor at CUNY and an author of a recent book, The Jobless Future. He has a perspective that goes back to Marxian roots and so forth, but he also begins to see the implications as far as the labor and progressive elements are concerned, as far as this displacement of labor. And we talked to him about it, and he offered some of his views. Dr. Stanley Aronowitz.
And then, of course, people could be working, other people with income could be doing a lot of decommodified things. I think that the idea of sharing ownership is important. Let me make one point. I went to a conference near Stockholm not 3 weeks ago. In that conference, somebody brought up a very old Swedish plan, which had been scrapped, and that was to use union pension funds to buy out Swedish capitalism. It would not eliminate the market economy, it would not eliminate many features of capitalism, but capital, which in Sweden now is holding the welfare state ransom for lower wages and lower benefits, could be bought out by pension plans. I belong to the Teachers Insurance Annuity Association, which holds my pension, which has assets of $47 to $50 billion.
Right.
Larger than the big three.
Right.
And they invest in the economy as it is. They have no strategy for addressing the economic problems of the society as a whole. If pension plans like the Teamsters and the teachers and a variety of other pension plans were deployed, I'm using the military metaphor because that's what they'd have to be, to actually develop a new regime of production, a new regime of leisure, a new regime of ownership, we could have a very different kind of, and a much more human, spiritually satisfying society.
It makes sense, doesn't it, to have the labor take the van and that, because after all, they're going to be affected by it, and they've not been able, as we say, they in the recent experience, they've not been able to stand up to the market forces have been directed against them, the labor sad to say. They've not, because some of these issues have been collectively bargainable, and they haven't been able to arrive at something that, you know, I think it was maybe because that they were not able, they had such a stake in having the labor value of the labor. We have you've studied Marxist theory, the surplus
value labor, or surplus labor theory, that is the value of the labor is what is productive, and capital is stolen or it's congealed labor, or they've got these traditional views so that they don't want to be associated with filthy lucre or something like that, or something. And there's that idea always of having free human beings rather than people who are tied up in that kind of thing. Has that been for people on the progressive side of things?
I think everybody's afraid. See, we have this idea in our head, Harold.
Yeah.
I mean, the left has this idea, and by which I mean not only the progressives, the labor people, and so on.
Yeah.
And the idea has been we have to stay away from this. From business.
Yeah.
We have to have an antagonistic, other side of the table relationship. Well, in many cases that makes sense.
Yeah.
But increasingly, it doesn't make sense to not use our resources to make the fight for jobs and make the fight for income and make the fight for a decent life. There are very few, there have been some individual unions and some individual groups of workers who've seen that they either will invest their resources or else they're going to be out of business. But very few. One of the things that's happened is that these huge pension funds that unions negotiate with employers across the bargaining table have been given to Wall Street investment bankers to deal with. They are run and managed by brokers, by investment bankers, by lawyers.
Somewhere. It's got to be invested somewhere.
That's
they can put it in treasury bills or something. But ERISA tries to guarantee the legitimacy of that. There's been some questions about that huge, the strength. We did have a savings and loan problem, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
And there are some others that we have in mind. So there is that. There is that. But there's that question of whether or not, and you said it. You said that they can bargain for jobs and income. Now, is it possible to be arguing for ownership as a source of income for the mass, rather than 95% of the people in our population would probably think only of getting income for life's purposes by having what you call a job or by transfer payments. I mean, that's the way they think. And yet the technology is increasingly, in automated processes, as your book points out, is what's really responsible for the production, right?
That's right.
So if they own a robot, does somebody who owns a robot have a legitimate claim to have income coming to them? And if it's good for the 5% who own it all, or 1% own 43% of the capital assets now, if it's good for them, would it be good for all to democratize that as a way of having income that would then free them with that income to do what they wanted in non-commoditized kinds of activities? And could we try to move toward that kind? Or is that violating some sort of economic principle that would not work?
Oh, I think it worked perfectly well. I don't think it's an economic principle at all. I think it's a principle of power. For example,
But we don't address it.
I understand that.
The progressive forces don't address that. We leave the ground to them.
If a TIAA simply used 1% of its assets, and that's a lot, to invest in a particular industry, communications or automobiles or whatever it wanted to do, it could have pretty rapidly a controlling interest. It would have to make certain kinds of alliances with other groups of capital. It might even have to develop a program for takeovers in one case and not takeover in another case. But it would be able to make certain kinds of demands on corporations as well as on banking organizations and investment organizations, which today it hasn't got any power to do.
Seymour Melman's come on to that now.
A very interesting thing has come to pass. A series of unions have discovered that by using the instrumentality of the employee stock ownership plan, called E.S.O.P, they can go to banks and other standard financiers, borrow money, buy the firm, have it held in the hands of trustees, while the union group has an increasing share of operation. So we've now got a handsome list of firms that have been bought out by local unions, and they'll have majority ownership of those firms. The important thing is this. In union hands, they have a stake in maintaining operation on a high level, in being economically viable, not for the next quarter, but for the long term.
That's right, if they're becoming the owners.
Exactly. Also, they have a stake in maintaining employment for the long term, because their interest in the enterprise is not simply a financial gamble.
Dr. Bertrand Chatel, former Chief of Science Applications in the United Nations, had many interesting things to say as well about technological unemployment and the need for a major change.
But now there is a new problem, which is unemployment. And work is shrinking. The volume of work available to be done is shrinking because there is automation, robots. There is an entry into the workforce of women since several years, which has doubled the work demand. And therefore, we have a new phenomenon, which is a shrinking of the work available and an expansion of the needs of the population, which has to eat, and when they are unemployed, they receive no money. Because our system is such that it is rewarding only the minority of a population which is employed. And when you have in developing countries, for instance, 30%, 40%, 60% of the active population which is unemployed, you realize that the majority of the population of this planet is unemployed. And the minority is employed. And we are, by our system, we are providing money, income, to this small minority of employed people.
The well-to-do.
Excuse me?
The well-to-do people in the world, right? In a sense,
And then our system is completely neglecting all those who cannot find work. This is not their fault because there is no work available.
Now, let me ask you, some people would say we've had all kinds of economic... You're an economist. You studied economics. You studied Adam Smith and Say's Law and Ricardo, and we've got Schumpeter, and we've got Lord Keynes, and we have Karl Marx, and all of these different kinds of systems of economic analysis and so forth to try and understand. And most of these would have said that for instance, agricultural workers were displaced by cotton-picking machines. The owner's task, picking the cotton. They then went into the factories that Henry Ford built in Detroit and provided the labor and found more labor opportunity in the factory making automobiles as the labor on the agriculture was displaced in the American economy. Then they say, as we begin to have these things apply to industrial manufacturing development, that these people who are displaced by the technology will go into service economy. And always there will be more jobs, and always as the productivity went up, the wages would go up, and we can just distribute wages to everybody. Just let's get everyone employed. If everyone is employed, then everything is going to be fine. Now, this is the view that most people have of the world. You take exception to that? Or that we're running into a new kind of condition that the historical condition doesn't give precedent for?
Okay. Because I don't want to change the free enterprise system, but I just want that it be adjusted to our new problems of the century, of the 21st century, where unemployment will be widely spread. I am optimistic, and I'll tell you why. In the science and technology, you have witnessed since 2 centuries a fantastic array of innovations. The world has been completely changed in regards to science and technology. But in the economics area, you don't see this change. It has not happened yet. So therefore, my hope is that the economists will start thinking a new system, just like the scientists have imagined communication, telecommunication, television, all this communication world which we have now. And therefore, the economists are behind. I am sorry to say that, but I think this is their turn to start innovating boldly.
It is the contention of this documentary that Louis O. Kelso, who unfortunately passed on in 1991, and his wife and long-term co-worker, shown here, Patricia Hetter Kelso, were setting that bold new course of thinking with their E.S.O.P, or employee stock ownership plans, and more importantly perhaps, the whole concept of binary economics, of which the E.S.O.P is but the tip of the iceberg. She is shown here in a couple of brief remarks which sets that paradigm role for the views of economics that she and Louis had pioneered, and is followed by some remarks by a long-term associate of both Patricia and Louis Kelso, decades-long association, Robert Ashford.
Binary economics begins with the life and work of Louis Kelso. This is not an extravagant statement, and Bob Ashford knows that Louis Kelso was a man who has changed, although the economics profession has yet to realize it, the regnant paradigm of economics.
He's done all the work. It's all there.
Kelso had done all the work and laid the groundwork that could be considered by policy decision makers if they could begin to start thinking in terms of this alternative system.
But you got to get over the idea that
if looking at the faces.
But you have to get over the notion that if you can't rationalize it in terms of productivity analysis, it's not worth talking about. One has to suspend that belief long enough.
And unfortunately, that traditional. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's that. Let me just say.
Yeah, we're just getting down the last couple minutes. So
just say that the people like Paul Tsongas that have talked about the intergenerational issues, saddling our next generation with debt. This is the opposite. We are capitalizing our next generation with productive capital.
This might be one way of addressing that problem in terms of a possibility that people of good conscience, Rudman, Sogman, and a lot of other people, of good conscience are groping for ideas. For that matter, Mr. Clinton.
Yes.
This argument could be addressed to Mr. Clinton.
Growing the economy with binary capital.
Yeah, in the name of economic democracy. This could be addressed to any person of good conscience as we grope for some new ideas given and be able to maybe create a system that could help us. I use it a good deal for people who watch the program, but James Joyce at one time had a character say, history is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken, and this might be an economic financial organization that would permit us to be able to awaken from a nightmare of scarcity-laden principles that have kept us in the unhappy situation that we've been in throughout history and are the basis of many of the problems that we confront today if we look at the current situation.
I think it's a new idea. It is susceptible to imperfections. That is to say, it's not a panacea. These government entities are as easily corrupted as others. There's really minimal government involvement in this. But the question is not whether it works perfectly or not. If we judge that, we should have no system. No system works perfectly.
Yeah, right.
If you judge the system that way, the question is, will it work better or worse than our present system? It never got a hearing in his lifetime. It ought to get a hearing now.
Yeah, and the important thing, as you say, it ought to at least have, as you say, a hearing rather than be just ignored by the economics discussion and the traditional thinking. It is a little bit different of a turf problem of your Keynesians, because you're in a certain sense asking Keynesians, Marxians, classicists, all economic schools to stop and rethink about those two faces that they're defining so well and try and look at the vase in the middle. We would like to thank all those who have helped in the technical aspects of production of the many pieces that went into the construction of this documentary. Particular thanks would like to be sent to Stephen Bell, who's helped over the long haul, Charles Fernandez, Jeffrey Sweetbaum, who helped produce a good deal of this program, Ed Fabre, and of course particularly the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, who made this possible. We also want to thank the many members of the E.S.O.P community of companies and government agencies which have helped in the encouragement of them, the E.S.O.P Association of America, as well as the National Association for Employee Ownership. Philosophically, we are particularly inspired, beyond Louis Kelso's long inspiration, by Robert Ashford and particularly by Patricia Hetter Kelso. Thank you very much.